Well, you may not know the name Samuel Lamb, but he was a hero of the Christian faith for millions of believers inside and outside of China. And he passed away on August 3rd at the age of 88. Lamb was arrested for his Christian faith during one of the first waves of persecution in Mao's China in the 1950s. He spent 20 years in Chinese labor camps. After his release, Lamb formed a house church and became one of the most influential leaders of China's underground church movement. One of his favorite themes was what he called the holy principle of more persecution, more growth.
And joining us now is CBN International correspondent Gary Lane. Gary has made several trips to China, and in fact, he met Samuel Lamb. Pastor Samuel, significant player in the underground church movement, right?
Yes. He and Alan Yuan, I think, were probably the largest influencers of that movement in the mid-50s. You got to remember, this was a time when China was under the influence of Mao. Communism was spreading their control over the government. But he said, no, we're not going to fall under the influence of the Communist Church. We're going to maintain our allegiance to the Lord.
Spent 20 years in prison, yet he didn't see persecution as a bad thing.
No, he didn't. And I asked him about that, George. I said, Pastor Lamb, tell me about the persecution. How do you view this? And he said to me, you know, before I went to prison the first time, we had 200 members in my church. I went to prison. When I got out of prison, it had grown to 900 members.
Wow.
He said, then the Chinese authorities came and they confiscated the church. After the confiscation, it had grown to 2,000 members. And then he smiled, that famous smile of his, and he looked at me and he said, persecution good for church. And that was his motto, as Wendy had said earlier, more persecution, more growth.
You have met him personally. You recount a particular incident about this, about the issue of persecution. What was he like? Tell us about the encounter that you had.
Well, you saw the joy of the Lord on his face and that smile that was he's known for. And just a kind and gentle man, very compassionate, but very strong in his faith. And he often preached about Job. And he would say, you know, Job suffered, but we can overcome anything that the enemy throws at us, and this church will grow. And he insisted on maintaining his allegiance to an underground church, not directed by the communist authorities.
What's his legacy?
I think his legacy is standing firm in the faith, that overcoming faith, and the church growing and maintaining its allegiance to God first and foremost, rather than the state. And I think he's also schooled many young people who have risen up and will lead the church in the future.
And to that point, Gary, he's trained a lot of the upcoming generation today. And talk about the future of the Chinese church today as opposed to the time of Mao.
Well, it's bright, and I don't think we're seeing the persecution that Lamb saw back in the 50s and 60s. Some of that is like limited to local areas, but the church is going to grow. More persecution, more growth. It'll happen.
And do you see that even though there isn't that much persecution today, you are excited about the numbers of people turning to the Lord in China?
At least 80 million, maybe 100 million or so, many every day coming because of the work of men like Samuel Lamb.
Fantastic.
What a blessing he was.
I know you count it as a privilege to have met him. Gary, thank you so much for the insight. Wendy?